So we're going to walk through some additional strategies this afternoon. So choice, we've talked about it in a couple of different ways. We know for some students, choice has to be visual. So I'm not going to go in depth there. If I'm giving direction, it matters that we keep it brief. We're giving them one piece of directions at a time. We're not giving them long explanations or justifications. It's too much words, right? For our students with autism and our friends that have disabilities, sometimes less is more. And if we think about it in terms of behavior, these are the kids that probably live in fight, flight, or freeze mode. I'm going to fight you to the death. I'm going to freeze up, or I'm going to run away. And when your brain is functioning in that mode, the higher processing parts of your brain, they just shut down. They just shut down. And so you are moving towards visual supports because they're going to promote that comprehension that you want, right? They're going to promote that comprehension. And the ring prompt cards that you guys have, so the ring prompt cards, they get cut out and put on a ring. Maybe you don't say all of these words. Throw them away, right? You don't have to have the full set. You need the words that you say. When I teach these, I start for my kids who have severe, so extensive support needs, right? For my kids who fall in that extensive support needs category, I'm only teaching 2 or 3 at a time, maybe, in the beginning, right? And I have to teach them what these mean. But I'm starting out with just a couple. I'm not using the ones that I never need to tell that kid, hands to self. Maybe it's a kid who always keeps their hands to their self. Then I don't worry about it. But maybe I have kids in my classroom that I do need to say that. So then maybe that's a card for me. So think about which of those cards matter for you and start with them there. And you're pairing that verbal direction with the visual cue. And those cards are meant for the adult to communicate to the child. I went to a school and they had the kids had them, and they were trying to have the kids use them as communication, but that's not what they're meant for. Let's think through communication. So we want to acknowledge or allow access for all communication. Can you guys hear me at all? Thinking through communication, this is called a communication bill of rights. I will just say that I can't imagine not being able to say, get out of my face, or, hey, I love that, or I want a cookie. So if you have a student with disabilities and they cannot communicate basic wants and needs, and think about it in this context, the average 3 or 4-year-old speaks 500 words. Think about that for a minute. 350 to 500 words is the average word count for a typically developing 4-year-old, right? Think about that in the context of the students. Sometimes people will tell me that they speak, and they do, but they only have 10 words and they're 15. I'm glad they have those 10 words. Thank goodness, right? But they probably need some additional supports. And communication can be multifaceted, right? It can look like lots of things. I'm a hand talker. I'm up here waving directions with my hands. We point and gesture. Communication can look like a lot of different things. So, and that's what this talks about. Communication could be all kinds of things. Anybody give kids the teacher eye? The face? I teach it to my Sunday school kids. If you use the teacher face with your students with autism, you need to teach it explicitly. In my classroom, at the beginning of every year, I told my kids, see this face? This is the face that I made when you need to make a new choice. Because this face says you're not doing something you should be doing, or you're doing something that I really don't like and you need to make a new choice. Teach that face to your students so you'll get a better response. What are forms of communication that we use? We've already said we use all kinds of forms. Facial expressions, pointing, manual sign language. Anybody have students who are signers? All kinds of things. Communication looks like many different pieces. We communicate for these reasons: to request items. For our most neediest students, and we're thinking about communication, the perfect place to start with is, what do they want? What will they, and kids will communicate about what they want, right? They want the iPad, they want a cookie, they want access to a favorite toy. I had a student who loved the good ice, the really good ice. He would communicate for the good ice. What do they want? Maybe it's to get rid of you, to terminate you, you got to go, or to terminate the activity. Maybe it's attention seeking. Maybe it's protesting, expressing choices, lots of communicative intent. We have to explicitly teach these skills. We have to teach kids to respond to their name. We do something, has anybody in here heard of preschool life skills? Or they're moving towards calling it universal life skills. Universal life skills, preschool life skills says, here are skills that people need to function in a school setting. If you don't have these skills, then you cannot function in a school setting. It's a research-based program and it's free. It's put out by Greg Hamley, but it teaches these things. How do you respond to your name? How do you follow a simple direction? How do you transition from activity to activity? These are the skills that we need kids to have, and we have to figure out a way to teach them explicitly because these kids won't come knowing them, and they won't learn them by watching our other friends. We're going to have to teach them for them. When we think about communication, we have to think about communication through something that we call functional communication training. Functional communication training says this child is engaging in a problem behavior. So they're engaging in a problem behavior. We need to teach them a replacement behavior, which is a communication response. How can they get the same thing at a student who was non-speaking when he wanted something out of the cabinet at his house? The first time I met him, I went and did a home observation, and his mom says, no, he tells me what he wants. And I'm like, wow, that's fabulous. How does he tell you? He goes to the cabinet and he screams, and he points at the cabinet. He screams and he points. I'm like, well, it is communication. So he screams and points until she pulls the right thing out of the cabinet. Anybody have a student? And that's how they communicate. They're going to point and scream. It's a starting place, right? For this student, we replaced that screaming with a picture card. We made a picture of everything that's in the cabinets. We put it on the front of the cabinet at her house. In my classroom, we replicated that. I had to keep my snacks locked in a metal cabinet because he was a kid that would eat until he made himself ill. So we had to kind of regulate snack options. And so when it was time, snack was on a schedule. So, but when it was snack, he could go to that cabinet and he could take a picture and give us the picture for what he wanted, right? You guys have seen this and done some of these kinds of things. So functional communication training basically takes an alternative response that gets them the same thing. So in your handouts, you have this page. So this is my functional communication. A lot of kids that I see need to be able to ask for a break, right? We're going to talk about it in the context of a break. Now I'm going to say, you see these cards, see this whole middle row that shows the guy taking a break with his feet up on the desk. Cut that out and throw that in the trash, right? I use the stop one because if I had shown my students the one with the feet up on the desk taking a break, then my students now have their feet up on the desk and I've given them a picture of a behavior I don't want. So in terms of this, I cut this out and throw it away. These stop signs get Velcroed, one on each. I can't find my one that's made. I think I've given it to somebody. So for my classroom, I had a student that teaching students to ask for a break always made me very nervous. Because my fear was if I teach this child to ask for a break, then they're never going to learn, right? I'm never going to work out, they're chronically in break. So how do you deal with that? For this particular student, we knew that his behavior was to get a break, but we were trying to deny him access to the break because I wanted him to do some work. And he was a kid that was capable of doing work. So his behavior escalated, unfortunately, due to my own self. So one day, the way that he communicated he needed a break was, so in my classroom with my student, I did not teach him to ask for a break. What did he start doing? His behavior escalated up. And eventually, he started flipping the desk. What happens when you flip the desk when you're trying to work? Do you get a break? Absolutely. You get a break. You can't work if you flip the desk. So finally, he flipped the desk and I got caught between, we tried bolting the desk down. He rips the desk out of the concrete because he's a big kid and he can do that. So he rips the desk out of the concrete, and I get trapped, and I end up with my leg caught between the desk and a chair, and I get a broken fibula, one of the long bones in the bottom of your leg, cracked in half. Right? So it's Tuesday. Miss Kim has a broken leg. I still have to come back to school. It's fun, right? So here we are. So I knew that I had to make a choice. I had to give him a way to get what he wanted in a socially appropriate manner because he was going to take a break. Did he get to have a break when he flipped the desk? Yeah, absolutely. He still got access to his break. I just hadn't given him a socially appropriate way to ask for it. So I had to change my thinking because I really didn't want to teach him to do that because I was afraid, my fear was he'd be permanently on a break. So what I did for him was a version of this. He had 3 cards. Now in the beginning, the first few days, every time he asked for a break, I just gave it to him. And his breaks were limited. We did a 3-minute break. He had a visual timer, like one of the ones where the red disappears. That was how we did it. For him in the beginning, when I first came back on crutches with my broken leg in the cast, I'm sitting in a chair. I had an aide stand behind him. And when he went to grab the desk to flip the desk, we had taped, I can't go away from here. We had taped this visual support to the desk so he couldn't throw it or it wouldn't be lost if he pitched the desk at me. And it said, I need a break. So he had 3 stop signs, 3 breaks. We peeled off a card. My assistant, when he went to grab the break, hand over hand, guided him to the break card. And I said, you need a break. Take 3 minutes. He would take 3 minutes and he would come back. The first couple of days, he didn't do it every time we worked, but he did it way more than I was comfortable with. But for the first few days, every time he asked for a break, it was a break. Because at that point, I was teaching him functional communication. And I was teaching it to that level because he was a severe safety issue. Getting broken bones was not functional for anyone. And that wasn't where I wanted to be at. So I had to make a sucky choice. So for a few days, that first week, every time he asked for a break, he got a break. After that, we started making it to where he got 3 breaks in one work session. And the work didn't go away. So he could ask for 3 breaks during trying to complete. And his work sessions were about 5 minutes long, right? His work sessions were very short. And during that time period, I made the work easier. Does that make sense? So I was doing multifaceted things besides the communication. He had figured out within 2 or 3 times, he figured out that it was easier to give me a break card to request a break than it was to go through all the effort of flipping the desk. That's essentially what functional communication is. But functional communication is considered a consequence intervention, right? Because you've already had a behavior happen and we're trying to fix it after it's happened. We're figuring out what did this behavior communicate and where are we trying to go with it. So you can replace a lot of problem behaviors with a variety of different communication. Help is a good one. I have seen lots of different items. Rejections, giving kids a way to reject the person might be a version of that. So accepting no, getting kids to wait, accepting changes. Anyone have kids that struggle with waiting? Yeah. So here's how I teach waiting. I teach waiting by not making them wait, right? I teach waiting by saying, I provide a wait card and I will say wait. And in the beginning, if it's very extreme, I'm having them wait for 0 seconds. I'll just say wait, and my expected response is they just stand there blankly or they say okay if they're able to do that. They either just stand still and they actually wait or they say okay. I have kids that I prompt either one. And then I'm slowly backwards chaining it. Now they wait for 1 second. Now they wait for 10 seconds. However long that child tolerates, and I'm teaching wait essentially by only having them wait a very short amount of time. And then I'm providing quick reinforcement by giving them access to whatever it is I'm asking them to wait for. If that's the iPad or if that's something else. Just thinking through some of those things. There's lots of tolerance training. Cooperation training might be thinking about a first then board or a token economy. There are lots of good options. I love first then boards. I think that, and we do these as functional adults in our heads all the time, right? It's Saturday. First, I need to do my laundry. Then I can watch Netflix. First, I've got to go to the grocery store. Then I'm going to cook dinner. Then I'm going to read that book that I love. I have a first in board on my keychain. My functional first in board as an adult is first work, then read. I love to read. I would read all the time. If you know of a good book, let me know. I'm always looking for good books. I can read a book a day if it's summer and I don't have anything else to do. But first then works for a lot of kids for a lot of different reasons. If you've tried it and it didn't work, then your then is not motivating enough. They're not interested in that, or what you're asking on the first is too big of an ask for that level of reinforcement, and you have to change it up. Or your kid has learned that the then, I had somebody say first math, then English. The kid was not reinforced by English, right? They weren't motivated by English. They didn't care. English was like, oh God, first torture, then more torture. I don't care. So you have to think that piece through, right? It was first torture, then more torture. Oh my goodness, they weren't happy to see that. Okay. I'm going to talk you through zones of regulation. Zones of regulation is a program from social thinking, and Incredible 5-Point Scale is a separate program. So you can Google both of them, and both of those, if you go to the web pages of, have a huge variety of free resources. So both work in the way that they are taking thoughts, feelings, and emotions and pairing them up with a number and a color, or in the case of zones of regulation, just a color, right? Learning how to do self-regulation is a skill that can take many, many years. When I talk about self-regulation, I always tell people, think about your own family, and I'll pick on my own family. When I think about my family, I know at Thanksgiving dinner, the person who's going to start all the crap, right? I know the person that's coming that's going to start all the fights or keep all the fights going before they get there. Their self-regulation skills are all over the place, right? So self-regulation is the thing that keeps functional adults out of jail, right? Because we all get mad. Who in here has not been mad? Maybe you haven't been mad today. Just wait. You still got to drive home. We all get mad. Hopefully we're all happy at some time. We are all probably sick, sad, and tired, and that could be today. We all have emotions, and we're all functional humans trying to learn how to deal with them. For our friends that are autistic or our other students with disabilities, we're going to have to give them, this is essentially a visual support to bring it down to where they can have a chance to learn how to have functional self-regulation. For many months, years, an adult is going to need to prompt this. This will not be independent, even for an older student. For many months, years, maybe, an adult will need to prompt this and say, you're in whatever. So Incredible 5-Point Scale, both of these have been around for a long time, and 5-Point Scale is from Carrie Burn. You can create them, and if you go to this 5pointscale.com downloadables, lots of free resources for getting started. All right, 5-Point Scale takes thoughts, feelings, emotions back to a color and a number. So a 1 is everything is fine, I'm having a great day. A 5 is rage. A 5 is whatever it needs to look like. The nice thing is that it's highly adaptable. I've seen this be used for a high school student that was doing inappropriate touching. So a 5 was parts of the body that they could not touch on strangers, right? A 1 was they had their hands to themselves and they were doing really well, right? A 5-point scale is 3 is yellow and 3 is what I call the rumble. Most of you, so anyone know, so if you know what your student triggers are, can you tell, is there a slow buildup or is it 0 to 60 or a mix, right? For our kids that are a slow buildup, we can catch it at a 3. The goal is to catch it and have interventions. So the whole part of sounds like, looks like, you're going to draw a picture there, or the child is going to draw a picture there, or you could use images. In that place, I have a student that we did this with Minecraft characters. I've seen it be done with superheroes. You can add in things that they're interested in. I have a kid that we did this with, that we did it with lizards and snakes. A 1 was happy like a chameleon. A 5 was a rattlesnake because it's poisonous and he was trying to avoid it. So you can incorporate student interest. The feels like category is hopefully you're building this with the child and you're putting in there, what do they feel like? The third category, the last category is the most important. I can try. What do I do if I'm at a 3? What strategies? So in that box, you're putting in strategies of, I could take a deep breath. I could go for a walk. What are their self-regulation strategies? And we have to teach those pieces. So it can be adapted, right? A 5-point scale, some kids a 5-point scale is too much. Some of the students that I use this with are young and we go to a 3-point scale, or sometimes my students have cognitive issues that a 5-point scale might be too much. It can be modified for a variety of needs. So that's something that it might look like. It blends and matches. So this is an either or option, right? I'm going to decide for each student, are they a person that 5-point scale is better? Sometimes I put a 5th category in. So behind that I can try, I have a category of adult prompts. So I'm not necessarily sharing those with the students, but my adult version says, hey, if Johnny's at a 3, remember, he loves cats, or he loves jokes, or he loves whatever. Here's some things. Here's some things for the adult to prompt him to help him avoid reaching a 5, right? So lots of options. Both of these zones of regulation or the 5-point scale, if you Google them, you're going to get a million examples of ways that you can use these with students that are pre-made. I like to build them with the student. My 4th grader who was out in the gen ed classroom, she did not like it on a 1-page sheet. For her, we built it on an index card with a book ring because she didn't want to see a 5. She told me, if I see a 5, I'm going to be at a 5. And I'm like, well, we don't want that. Let's not do that. So we did hers on a stacking ring. So you can modify and change this for your student. It just depends. Both have great options and points with them. Does that make sense? Both have different things. So zones of regulation is our other option. Both of these help with self-regulation. Zones of regulation just took their book out of print. And I know some of you all have zones of regulation on your shelf. I know you guys have it out there in your district. If you don't have the book, message out in your district, because KVEC did a book study a few years ago and we gave them out by the handfuls like candy. So I know they're floating around in your school district, but they just stopped making the book and they've gone to you have to pay like a monthly fee, a subscription, right? The book is still valid and still highly useful and you only need one book. So I would say if you think you're going to use zones of regulation, the difference between the two is 5-point scale does not have a curriculum with it, right? Zones of regulation comes with, here's 18 lessons that you can teach this child and walk through to help them build self-regulation strategies. 5-point scale says, come up with your own plan. It's not as in-depth as that. So ask in your district and see if you have zones of regulation. Look on your teacher material shelf. It could be there in hiding. Zones of regulation has been around for more than 15 or 20 years. Okay, so 5-point scale works in this way. Zones of regulation. Sorry guys, I don't even know what I'm talking about now. Zones of regulation works it has 4 zones, right? The blue zone is sick, sad, tired, bored, right? It's a low state of alertness. We're probably all in the blue zone at this point. The green zone is, I'm happy, I'm calm. Hopefully this is where your student is at. I'm ready to learn. The red zone is where we don't want to be. The red zone means I am out of control. I might feel rage, anger. I could be devastating. Maybe I got devastating news. The red zone is where we would like to avoid. If you have students in a red zone, your priority is safety. We'll talk about that at the end. If you have a kid who's in the red zone, the only thing you can do is keep them safe, hopefully keep yourself and everyone else safe. That's my only goal. Once we've reached peak of a meltdown. I'm limiting my spoken words. It's not a teachable moment. I can validate kids' feelings without agreeing with what they're doing. I can see you're mad. I can tell you're really angry right now. Red zones are going to probably evoke emotion for you. It does for me. When I see kids go through rage, it triggers in me too, right? This is a good place to give kids time and space. If I don't need to be right up in their face at this moment, I'm going to be back at a safe distance if that's doable, if they're a child that I can do that with. Not every student will let you back out of their space. There's a very nice option, which is lesson 17, called Stop, Opt, and Go. Stop, Opt, and Go is you teach students a visual support that says, stop what you're doing. What are your options? If I hit Johnny, then I lose my recess. If I tell the teacher I need help or that Johnny took my toy, then I can still get recess. It's a visual support to help kids think about, what are my choices? What can I do? How do I get the pathway of what I want? The yellow zone is hopefully where we will catch kids at. The yellow zone is things are starting to rumble. I'm starting to feel unhappy. Maybe I'm getting frustrated. I'm angry, but I still have control at this point. I'm not at the point of a total meltdown. Zones can look like a lot of different things. The thing about zones and the resource, the visual support that you have, one last time, the visual support that you guys have in the printables, the one that looks like this, is there are color-coded options of what can the child do if they're reaching one of those colors. That's the goal with both Incredible 5-point scale and zones, is to teach them, hey, I'm in a yellow zone right now. What can I do to help myself get back to the appropriate zone? How can I, because we all move through cycles of feelings throughout the day, lots of different points and times. So, starter tips are, adults have to model this. When I'm teaching this, thank you. When I'm teaching this, I'm going to model this. I didn't even have to pretend. I knew for myself there was a couple of points in the day with my kids that when they came in to work with me, I was going to either pretend to have something happen or life would just happen and I would be in one zone or the other. And I would let my students coach me through what to do. Because when we talk about thoughts, feelings, and emotions, it's hard. It's really hard for some kids, especially if they've been through trauma, especially if they're a kid who lives in anxiety land. They're not going to be able to say, I am in the red zone. They may never say that. You're going to have to use other examples. I used my kids' literature when we read children's books. Llama, llama, mad at mama. What zone is the llama in, right? I used, for my high school students, we were talking about history. They were in a history class, and what zone of regulation was Napoleon in when he took over a continent? What zone do you think he's in? And we talked about it in the context of a less threatening than hey, you're in a red zone. That was how we started out with it. So we used some of those other things. If you work as a team, you need everybody to buy in. All adults checked in. Throughout the day, there was a couple of specific points that we had check-ins. Beginning of the day, after lunch, towards the end of the day. We had some kind of set check-ins that everybody in my class. I have a couple of school districts in northeastern Kentucky that are using zones of regulation school-wide. It's now a part of their PBIS program, and they're in multi-tiered systems of support. They're using zones for all students. So the nice thing about it is that zones is adaptable to be used school-wide for all students, and it is research-based. Both of those programs are research-based for ages 4 into adulthood. So ages 4 and up, all the way into adulthood. Zones has a book nook. If you go to the website or if you Google Zones book nook, it has a list of kids' literature is in there. A list of kids' literature that you can pull books from and say, hey, this book is the red zone, this book is the blue zone, and then talk about it with those characters versus talking about it with the child. We're going to end our day by thinking through how do we create a safe environment, right? And how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep our students safe if that is possible? And I know that it is not always possible. What can we do for safety? And I want to talk through, you guys have the de-escalation cards. Those sets, we'll talk a little bit about those. So, how do you create a safe environment? We have to dress for safety. If you've ever met me and you have a student that bites, I'm going to tell you to wear a loose hoodie. Doesn't look professional, but 100% is safer. How can I dress for safety? So I've dealt with kids that pull off your skin. I've dealt with kids that bite to the level of breaking skin. Thinking through wearing your running shoes. I'm not wearing my heels, right? Today I'm in my Crocs just in case I needed to run from you all. Seriously, there is a way that you can think about dressing for safety. If I have a student who bites, I'm going to consider loose, long sleeves. I do not want it to be tight. Tight is easier to bite. I want them, if they're biting down, to grab a mouthful of sweater or a mouthful of hoodie. I had permission. Our school had a policy that you were not allowed to wear, as an adult, you could not wear a hoodie to school. I do not know why that was the rule, but you could not wear jeans or a hoodie because that was not professional. But I got permission to wear them in my classroom, at least the hoodie piece, because I could not keep myself from not being chewed up by some of my kids. Think about the clutter of your classroom. Is your classroom have places that are safe for you to move students through? If you need to do that, just be aware of things on the floor. I had an aide that tripped over a toy, when trying to deal with a student and fell and cracked her tailbone because of how she hit, right? So just thinking through, if you're dealing with a student who is in an escalated, right? They have hit peak. We're at the peak part of the escalation cycle. We are clearly in the red zone here. If they're in the red zone, know who's in that environment with you. Know who's behind you, who is around you. Know where the exits are. And maybe you're probably, with some of my kids, we had to stand like this in front of the exit if we were having a bad enough day, right? We're blocking those exits. Be aware of how you're positioning your body. Anybody in here have restraint training, right? Fall back on your restraint training. And I will say, putting my hands on a child, on a student, is my very last resort. I will move heaven and earth if I can before I have to physically restrain a child. Because if I'm having to restrain that child, I risk myself being sued or doing something wrong, harming myself or the child. And I have restraint training if I'm putting my hands on a child. If you do not have restraint training, you should talk to your school district, right? Because the legalities of that get muddy, get very muddy. So if I have a student who has extreme behaviors, I know what their triggers are, if I can at all. I have taken that ABC data that we talked about earlier, and hopefully I have a behavior intervention plan. And the people around me know what that is. And if you're in the process of building that behavior intervention plan, think about the pieces that you need. So for staff behavior, you have to manage your own behavior, right? And this is a place that I will say, I have to know what my triggers are. As a functional adult, there are things that kids do that flip my lid or take me to a place to where I'm escalated. Many years ago, I got bitten by a student to the bone and almost lost my hand. So if I come to you and your kid bites me, 20 years ago, I was going to need to go in the hallway and cry about it, right? Because for a long time, and if another child bit me, it left me with some lasting, lingering scars, right? And some personal trauma from an extreme bite. We're talking 25 years ago now, 20 plus years ago.
I got bit during my K-tip observation because that's how my life works. My university supervisor drove me to the hospital with broken ribs. A kid wiped the floor with me, right? So I know that if a student bites me or a student is biting, I have to check my reaction to that child because that is a trigger for me personally. Think about what's your triggers. What things push your buttons? We all have triggers, right? Triggers are hard. I had a speech therapist that I worked with that she could not handle being spit on. A child spit on her, and she could not take it. So if you know something is a trigger for you, you need to have a phone a friend, if you can. Within my classroom settings, my assistants knew that I had previously had a severe bite injury, and if a kid had bitten me, they knew we were going to need to tag team out so I could go cry in the corner, right? They knew that I was going to need a minute, and we had worked that out. So within your context, hopefully you have a person, someone else in your classroom that can support you. This is also a good time to know, phone a friend, right? Thinking through, who do you call if things are at the level that you need backup and support? My last classroom had an emergency button. Anybody having a classroom with an emergency button? Yes. If you have an emergency button, make sure that wherever that button goes to, mine was the school secretary, make sure that they actually know what they should do. If you hit the button, right? Make sure they know what you should do. Think about co-regulation here, right? We have to come from a place of calm, and that can be very hard, but we have to be able to come from a place of calm. Don't take student behaviors personally. Do not engage in an argument with them at this point. If they're at peak, less words are better, right? And we want to remember dignity and respect for the student at all times. I will say I have been in some of the districts that have ended up on the news, right? And I knew some of those teachers. They were fabulous teachers that had a really bad personal day, met with a student who was also having a really bad personal day, and they got together and blew up like gasoline, right? So know that because we have to acknowledge we're human too. And we bring part of the experience into the classroom. The way that we respond is going to impact. And we're just people too, trying to survive the day. So know those things. Evaluate, what are you trying to accomplish? Is this really critical right now? I had a student that melted down over a math paper. And I understood where they were trying to go. They didn't want him to learn that he could get out of math every time he had a meltdown. So they were asking him to do 5 more problems, and he's trying to do the problems, but he's screaming and crying, and he's crumpled that paper in and out like an accordion about 40 times. And I said, let's do 1 problem. 5 problems at that point, that was too many problems. Let's do 1. Call it a day. Staff behavior. How are you going to communicate with your staff? One of the sets of ring cards that you have were de-escalation cards. Those are to communicate with the adults in your classroom. I have had students that I couldn't say if I gave more verbal attention to their behavior, I was going to escalate it up, right? So for them, here's my favorite, call the admin, right? Call the admin. Say a prayer. Call the admin. I have had some, hey, review the behavior intervention plan. You can look at those. That's like, call Jesus, please help us. Let's look at these. Decide which ones might be relevant for your circumstance. There's a lot of cards that might be too many cards. There may be some on there that you're never going to use. Toss them in the trash. Maybe your cards need to say other things. I had a student that our school had a policy, if you were restraining a student, the nurse had to come and take notes. Anybody have that policy? The nurse came and took minute by minute notes because we were physically restraining a kid. So we had to call the nurse because we knew that we were going to have to restrain this kid. But if we said out loud, call the nurse, then that was a trigger for the student, would escalate even more. So limit your verbal communication for everyone. Sometimes we get into circumstances to where other adults come by. We're in a hallway, adults come by, and they make comments about things that are going on. I think one of those cards say, please ignore. Please walk on by. Please keep going. Use the student's name. Maybe you're praising appropriate behavior immediately. Maybe the child was throwing chairs and they've set the chair down, and you can say, thank you for setting the chair down. Some sort of positive in that moment. Try to withhold attention for challenging behaviors. Redirect. Do not ignore them unless planned ignoring is a part of that. But I'm going to assume if you're at the point of a massive meltdown that ignoring is not an option. Prompt the desired behavior. Tell them what you want them to do, right? That's the place where you switch to the other cards that say things like feet on the floor, because I cannot kick you if my feet are on the floor. Nice hands. I can't be hitting you if I have nice hands. It's always better to request and suggest. This is a good place if you can give an option. Hey, I can see you're really upset right now. Would you like to sit on the beanbag, or would you like to sit in the rocking chair? Would you like to sit in the purple chair or the green chair? Give them some choice if you can. I'm going to say, this says answer informative seeking questions with a rational response. Answer challenging questions by sticking to the topic. So sometimes kids get into that meltdown mode and they're just challenging you and throwing out lots of verbal interaction, thinking about which questions do we really answer, which questions do we ignore. That's going to depend on your student and the circumstances. Use the term safe. Hey, I need you to be safe by having a safe body. I have my hands are to myself. How you say it is going to matter. Be firm, but try not to be aggressive or impatient or condescending. Don't yell if at all possible. Calm, even cadence. Kids can tell when they rattled your cage, right? Kids know. So try to maintain your poker face as much as you can. Use first then language, right? Hey, first, I need you to find a chair and sit down, and then we can talk about whatever it is. First, we need to do this. Pulling back to some of those kinds of pieces. Distance, stay back. If you can at all, I'm staying back out of kicking or arm reach distance. I don't need to be right in their face unless it's a child that has reached the point that they are going to harm someone else or harm themselves. Or they do super impulsive things. I had a student that tried to jump out of a window when they were in a meltdown. Maybe it's movement. We're thinking how fast we're moving. Touch perception. Go slow if you can at all. And I will tell you, I'm putting my hands on kids only as a complete and utter last resort, right? It is my very last resort before I'm going to have to be super hands-on or I'm having to physically restrain a student, just because the liability for lawsuit or the liability for I could hurt them or injure myself is very high. Think about your own body language. Also think about trauma history. Restraining kids that have a trauma history can be extra bad for them because you can trigger things and make it worse. So know those kids. Who can I restrain safely? Who maybe I cannot restrain them safely. And then if I cannot restrain them safely, then what are my options? Also know yourself and your size. I'm 5'5" and I work with kids that were 6'4". Can I restrain somebody who is 6'4"? No. No, I cannot. You cannot do that. So that comes back to that know when to call for help, when to call on somebody else. Think about your posture, your eye contact, facial expressions. I am a leg length away. I have a wide base, so if they try to shove me down, hopefully I'm not going to go. This is a thinking arms position. They make a recommendation of a thinking arm position. It kind of protects your chest, kind of keeps your arms out of range. In my classroom, I kept the giant hoodie, and if I had to start to go into a meltdown mode, I put my giant hoodie on. That was the point where I put it on. I will also say I kept my classroom, y'all see how cold it is in here? I would call this prison cold. Anybody ever gone to visit somebody in jail or in a hospital? It's cold for a reason. It's cold because the cold keeps you calmer. So seriously, there's research to back that up. If you live in a classroom with kids with intensive behavior needs, make it be snow. It's time to keep it as cold as you can stand because cold will slow down the behavior. Other things to think about, who can I call for help? Who is my leader in my classroom? If I'm working with multiple adults, and I know some of you do, you're in a classroom with multiple other adults, whose job is it to respond? Because sometimes when there's a child in crisis and you have multiple adults who are throwing out directions or throwing out words at them, you can't do that, right? We've got to have one person that's in charge of whatever this crisis is, right? Stay between the student and the exit. Talk quietly. My trick is to go to a whisper. I'm going to start whispering things and I hope that they will have to slow down enough to hear what I'm saying. And other things, I'm thinking about help. I'm prompting for them for wait. And I'm asking them, hey guys, do you need help? What can I do? How can I support you? A help strategy is ask the student what they want. So this is, if the student is going into a meltdown, you're going, hey, how can I help you? How can I help you get through this? What do you want? You're giving them time to process those requests. You're giving them access. Thank you for telling me what you need. You can have whatever it is, if it's something that they can have. Or we have to wait until later, but let's look at your favorite puzzle instead. Right? We're thinking through some of those pieces. Maybe we're acknowledging. I asked a student this week, I asked a kid, I'm like, hey, what would make you feel better right now? And he's like, I want to go home. And I'm like, me too, kid. Me too. I want to go home too, but we can't go home right now. But let's check your schedule. Let's see what's next. And going home is coming. We're all going to go home. Maybe we're just acknowledging it. Maybe we're prompting. And a prompting strategy, we're in a safety stance and we are prompting the desired replacement behavior. So maybe it's hey, if you need a break, tell me you need a break. Give them 10 seconds to process and then prompt that. Or maybe I'm prompting it with a visual and saying, hey, you need a break. I'm prompting them through it. And then you're praising cooperation. The wait strategy is remove everybody else, right? I'm removing the others and any potential weapons. If they're a kid who not having sharps or maybe they're going to throw things, I'm thinking that through and I'm moving those types of items away. I'm monitoring for safety, but I'm staying back as far away as I can. I'm avoiding reinforcing attention-seeking behavior. I'm not talking or responding, and I'm minimizing my eye contact. This is not the time to teach or rationalize, unfortunately. If I have a student who has frequent meltdowns, and you can decide by what frequent means. If I have a student that has major meltdowns to the point that it is a safety issue, then I have an emergency plan. You guys have to think through an emergency plan for those students. A part of an emergency plan is who's going to help with that student. Where are my other students going? In my classroom, we had a red folder emergency drill. I added it, right? In my classroom, we had something we called the red folder emergency drill. Every student in my classroom had a red folder. In that red folder were extra copies of work. Sometimes it was coloring sheets or sheets or things that they would find reinforcing. Sometimes it was a book. And they knew that when it was a red folder emergency, their job was to get their red folder out and go into the hallway and line up against the wall. My other kids they got a reinforcement of if they left the classroom nicely, because my other kids were now breaking their schedule and messing up their day, which is very upsetting for them as well. But I reinforced them with abject bribery and candy. They knew that if they took that red folder and they went into the hallway, then they were gonna get a sucker or some sort of candy reinforcement when they came back that I didn't provide at other times. So where are they going? Have a plan for that. Some of my kids went back to gen ed. Some of my kids went to the other unit. Some of my kids went to the speech therapist, just depended on who it was that was melting down and who was having to leave. Who can I call for help? Am I hitting that emergency button and the secretary doesn't know what it really means? What helped that child in the past to calm down? What things calmed them down in the past that let us go back to work? What are common triggers for the student? And how can I avoid them? You can't avoid all triggers, but some kids, if I can avoid the trigger, I had a student that was triggered by balloons. If he saw balloons, he would go into a rage. I do not know why or how that came about. At school, you would think you could avoid balloons, but the lunch celebratory week, they brought in all these balloons all over the schools, and I was like, oh God, oh no, what do we do? I'm going to call his parent and be like, there's balloons everywhere. I don't know what to do. The next year, I was like, we cannot have balloons. We cannot do this to me again. Maybe it's staff training, and you're telling the people that you work with, hey, when Johnny is melting down, I'm going to do the talking. Your job is to help me. Maybe I'm using those de-escalation cards, but I don't want multiple adults now barking orders at Johnny, who's already upset. I'm thinking through those pieces. And I need to document events. You may include other things. I will say if you have kids at this level, then you need to de-escalate at the end of the day. You're going to need to come back with the people that were involved with that and kind of quickly walk through, hey, here's what's happened. Here's what I think I might have done differently. Here's what I would do again. Some of those pieces. For my kids that we had frequent meltdowns, we kind of walked through it because these are traumatizing for us too. These are stressful and traumatizing for us too as functional people. So how do we recover? That's the place we hope we get. Allow that kid to go back to familiar task. I will tell you, for my students, we taught calm down strategies. All of my kids practiced calm down strategies every day when they were calm. It was a part of our everyday routine. We did workstations or we did adult folder work. So if my kids were going into recovery, I sent them to calm down task. They were going to do some breathing exercise. They were going to punch Play-Doh because punching me is a bad option, right? We did some calming tasks and walk those through. So think about, how am I teaching calm to my students when they are calm? Familiar task. You want to jump them back into the routine because being on your everyday routine is calming. Reflect and restructure our response. So we're doing that with other adults. We're going to problem solve. What happened here? Is this something we could have avoided? What could we do differently next time? What will we do the same? And then develop a plan with the team if they need to. This is something called SOTAs. It's a skill that you can teach for your students. It's situations. So it's kind of like a social autopsy. Has anybody ever heard of a social autopsy? It's where, it's where you take a social moment and you look at where it broke down. There is a set of resources called OCALI, OCALI, Grab and Go resources. It's free, and it has a lot of things like this SOTAs or social autopsies, to where you've had a social error, and it gives you a visual way to walk through with that student so they can figure out what should they do differently next time. So it's kind of that kind of a strategy. So prevention, you have to intervene with compassion while focusing on cooperation, right, instead of compliance. And we have to understand, what is that behavior communicating? Our goal is to avoid power struggles. Who wins in a power struggle? Nobody. Nobody wins in a power struggle, right? Our goal is to provide empathy and support. This is a quote: our job is not to dominate, but to de-escalate. Or better yet, how do we prevent escalation in the first place? Ours is not to coerce, but to listen, learn, guide, and coach, right? Ours is not to redirect, restrain, or merely manage and modify. Ours is to share and shape, right? We have to prioritize safety and televisibility above all else of what we do. Televisibility means that we have no idea where the cameras are now, right? I've seen a lot of, I hear on the news and it breaks my heart. So-and-so parent put a camera on the kid's backpack and filmed the classroom, and this is what they saw, and it was horrific. And I know you guys aren't doing those kinds of things. I don't think that at all. But we have to think about, we might be on camera at any time. And so our behaviors have to be above reproach for our students, more so than ever before because of that fact alone. It may be televised.